So welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to the 13th Annual Honors Program Student Research Conference. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago to folks who had arrived a little bit earlier, when I heard that we would be going online in the fall, me as the honors coordinator, my first response was, oh man. And then my second response was, I'm not canceling the honors conference. And so even though we're remote and we are doing this via Zoom, our students have been hard at work doing research this semester. And so this is a chance for us to celebrate the research that our students have completed. This year's conference, we had 25 students who were accepted to the conference and are submitting their research. Because of the kind of roll with the punches nature of 2020, what we decided early on was that at least that's what my dogs decided early on. What we decided early on was we would pre-record all of the other panels. Hey. Of course. We would pre-record all the other panels and we would only do the prize-winning panels live. And so that's what we're doing right now. Over the next couple weeks, over the Thanksgiving break, as Professor Amidon and I work with the students who are submitting their video presentations, we're sort of putting together a kind of online suite of asynchronous panels that will be available in the next couple weeks before the end of the semester. As we're still working with students who are trying to squeeze in doing their presentations, between studying for midterms and turning in their papers and whatnot. So that will be coming, and I will make sure to let everybody know once the entire conference is uploaded online that when it's available. But for those of you who are here for the plenary session, welcome. Thank you for taking this time to participate in our student research. And so today we have the pleasure of kind of our MC slash speaker for today is Michael Love from Counseling. He also works with the honors program as sort of our designated hitter for counseling in the honors program. And so today he's going to introduce and he's going to sort of ref the Q&A session of the panel after our student presenters present. So without further ado, I will send it off to Michael.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Hogan. I'm definitely excited to be able to be with you all today and really celebrate the research and the hard work that our students have put in, especially during this pandemic that we've incurred. The spring semester, summer, and this fall semester have absolutely been something that we've never seen or experienced before. But I do believe that the hard work that we've put in and our students have put in should be celebrated, and that's what we'll want to do today. So as I was reading the abstracts, going over each of them, shout out to each of the winners. They were really, really good. I was impressed by the depth of research that was put in. It absolutely felt like the students did not stay on the surface level. They really went in depth with some of the topics that they got into. And to me, as I was reading them, it gave me a tie-in theme. I personally truly believe that we all, regardless of the differences that we may have, which absolutely should be celebrated, I do believe that at our core beliefs are truly the same. I truly believe that each of us wants to be able to pursue our own goals pertaining to our own happiness. I believe that each of us wants to have a job or career that truly fulfills us, and then also be able to live in a way that we feel protected, heard, and valued. It's having a heart for humanity is what I truly believe. I looked at each of the abstracts and then looking at how they were presented and the research that was done, I truly believe that all of them fit into that guise of having a heart for humanity, because truly that helps us all thrive. So what I would like to do briefly, there's a couple of points that stuck out to me. For each one of them, I'll go over those briefly, and then I will go ahead and introduce each one of the presenters for their actual projects. Again, going towards that heart for humanity, what I realized, starting with, I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing each of your names correctly. If I'm not, please let me know and I will correct it. Beginning with Heba Khan, the Norco College's President Award winner. Her theme or her research was on the rise of Islamophobia and the impact that that has on the physical and mental health. So as I started reading into it, I'm looking into the research that she was doing, and I'm absolutely can understand the impacts on mental health. My own experience and understanding, looking at it through a different lens, but being viewed as a threat, and how that plays into the denial of human rights, both physical and mental. My own understanding of that came from when I was a child. 9/11 happened when I was 14 years old. That's when the phrase of Islamophobia was introduced to me. And as I got older, I truly understood it as the fear of what we don't understand or what is not common to us can so easily be turned to hate. Again, bringing that back, understanding that the humanity in us all is what truly ties us together. Then I jump to, again, I'm do the best that I can to pronounce your names. If I pronounce it incorrectly, let me know. Idali Gomez, the Riverside City College presidential winner, and her research topic, the institutional facilities, the abuse of is the antithesis of rehabilitation. She went deep into it. She's talking about the juvenile justice system and how it's supposed to be or presumed to be rehabilitative. But we all know that that's not truly the case. As an American society, we incarcerate more of our citizens than all other countries in the world. So I like how she pulled back that curtain a little bit of what truly rehabilitation meant. Looking forward and looking into understanding that we all understand the private prison system has been built on the backs of our brown and Black young men. Again, if we all were coming with a guise or same lens that having a heart for humanity helps us all, we're all going to be better for it. And then I jump into Jerilyn Hurtado's project, which the Moreno Valley College's president winner, and she talks about the abused and exploited children. I'm hurt. This was so impactful as I'm reading this, because as I'm going through the research, I've heard so many times or too many times that the system has failed them. Where so many instances we've become reactionary instead of proactive. And that just boggles my mind, because in the society we're in right now, we love children. Think about the holidays that are coming up, how kid-oriented they are. Think about how much we promote and celebrate kid birthdays. Think about, even go back to your own refrigerator art and how your parents promoted that because they wanted to celebrate it. How much we love kids in our society, but still how prevalent child abuse is. Wrapping that back, if we all are coming through with a lens of having a heart for humanity, it truly helps us all. And then jumping into Jacob, who was actually the Chancellor's Award winner from RCC. I truly love the presentation, the research about the assimilation of nerd culture. Oh, I like this. So I'm looking and I'm reading about it. And one of the things that jumped out to me is how popular it is becoming to be the nerd. So when he started talking about the pros and the cons, and yeah, there's pros and cons to everything that we go through. So can some of them be antisocial, some of the activities? Absolutely. But as I'm looking at it, think about as we've gotten older, just about every nerd considered activity can be done with a group. People into anime. Oh, we have cosplay. I'm from San Diego, so Comic-Con is amazing. If you've never seen it, it's amazing. All right, well, maybe we're into gaming. E-gaming has exploded to the point to where you're able to get a college scholarship for e-gaming. Fortnite is going crazy. They had the Fortnite World Cup last year, and I do believe it was Kyle Giersdorf won $3 million playing Fortnite. Then we go, okay, well, maybe I'm into painting or into the arts. Paint night, dinner and paint, sipping paint, yoga, painting yoga. There are so many activities to get us interacting through the arts. What about if you're into random knowledge, as I love? Jeopardy. Shout out to Alex Trebek. I know we lost him this week. That was my favorite show of all time. Where else can you win money on random knowledge? So if we take a look at the things that have been considered nerdy, and we look in the society that we're in now, where we're being forced to be more in an online format, a lot of those nerdy activities are the things that are keeping us connected. We realize entertainment is not just sports, and it's not just music, and it's not just film. These so-called nerdy activities are truly bringing us together. Again, if we're able to have the understanding, and the way that I look at this, when I go back to the cosplay example, it doesn't matter the individuals that you're sitting next to. You're not concerned on if they're of the same culture, of the same nationality as you. You're into the same thing. Two individuals playing Fortnite gaming in two different areas are not concerned about, is this person the same as me? Do they look like me? Do they speak like me? No, you're being brought together by the love of the game. Truly having a heart for humanity helps us all. And that is what I felt was the tying together piece, how they all bonded. Each of them were different and they talked about specific parts, but as a whole, I think the research that each one of these award winners put together was amazing. And it truly shows that our students are truly wanting to dig deeper and critically think about ways that they could change not only the individuals around them and their communities, but moving forward, change the world. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce the first award winner. We're going to go ahead and go with Hiba Khan from Norco College.
Hi, everyone. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen first. All right. Okay. So can you guys see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So, hi, everyone. My name is Hiba. I attend Norco College. This is a paper I wrote for my English 1A honors course with Professor Dan Reed, and it's on the disastrous impacts of Islamophobia, and it is a rhetorical analysis. So to start off with the main question, what is Islamophobia? So Islamophobia is the discriminatory prejudice rooted solely on the basis of religion that is faced by millions of Muslims across the globe today. From daily negative sentiments to life-threatening hostility, Islamophobia is used to depict the bigotry and adversities millions of Muslims from every corner of the world encounter more often than one might think. As a violation of human rights that often leads to inaccessible opportunities and even at times violence, Jewish epidemiologist Jeff Levin and Protestant sociologist Ellen L. Eidler argued that the topic of Islamophobia is one that must be addressed and further discussed among those in the public health sector in order to create an atmosphere where Muslims may freely exercise their right of worship, lacking the myriad of consequences of Islamophobia that lead to detrimental health issues among the Muslim population. Now, to get more exactly into my research, obviously I wrote this rhetorical analysis for my English class. However, I do believe that it is important and it's actually intriguing to analyze exactly how academics attempt to persuade their peers in their field of study to better understand their arguments, the need for the resolutions they propose, and exactly how their arguments impact their target audience. As someone who is Muslim, as someone who has experienced Islamophobia growing up, this topic is one that really stings. So I truly believe that the discussion on the disastrous impacts of Islamophobia is one that needs to be brought to surface. Thus, I want to see how these authors, Levin and Idler, attempt to persuade their peers in the public health sector to open up for a discussion on such a sensitive topic like this to further find the resolutions. In short, I want to find the answer to the question, how do academics persuade academia? And thus, the goal of this presentation is to discuss exactly how Levin and Idler attempted to persuade their academic audience of the public health sector to create a larger and more focused discussion on the devastating physical and mental health impacts of Islamophobia. Rather than focusing on what Levin and Idler are arguing for, I want to direct my attention more to how they're arguing for it. To be more precise, today my presentation aims to rhetorically analyze these two specific techniques of persuasion, including one, appeals to the objectives of the mission of the public health sector, and two, appeals to conducted studies, all persuasive techniques used by Levin and Idler in their article, Islamophobia and the Public Health Implications of Religious Hatred, in order to reach their audience of individuals participating in the public health sector. And so to begin, in order to truly understand as to why Levin and Idler make use of these specific techniques of persuasion, it's essential to first identify their target audience. So in this piece published in the American Journal of Public Health, the most prominent evidence for the target audience being participants of the public health sector is the author's usage of inclusive diction when addressing the reader. So for example, phrases such as our work as public health scientists and professionals, and the constant reference to the mission of the public health sector, these are all major disclosures of the target audience. From the usage of this inclusive diction, the reader can infer almost immediately that the authors address their audience as their fellow peers in the public health sector by appealing to shared circumstances that give rise to a sense of inclusiveness and shared values. On top of the inclusive diction Levin and Idler exhibit, based on seeing that the article was published in the American Journal of Public Health, a journal specifically for those playing a role in the field of public health, the reader can assume Levin and Idler published this piece in this journal with the intention of reaching that specific audience of public health scientists and professionals. And so the first technique that will be discussed revolves around Levin and Idler's appeals to the objectives of the public health sector. The authors tell that the professional values that make up the moral mission of the public health sector include the primary prevention of issues that may lead to harm, the dedication to social justice to serve the greater good, and maintenance of a global perspective to honor the human rights of every individual. Levin and Idler quote that these all moral missions of the public health sector actually fall parallel to the values of every Muslim. Thus, by failing to address a more focused discussion on the violation of human rights that is Islamophobia's expansion, the public health sector further fails to comply with the mission they once intended to follow through with. Overall, Levin and Idler make the argument that their target audience of public health academics have failed the Muslim population by creating an atmosphere that demonstrates the assumption that the disastrous issue of Islamophobia can be justified and excused due to the seemingly habitual manner of the public health sector to exclude the Muslim population from the moral mission of their sector's role in society. Now, Levin and Idler make use of this technique of appealing to the moral objectives of their audience to further evoke emotions of tied responsibility and thus guilt. Not only does the elaborate explanation of the mission of the public health sector that they describe demonstrates Levin and Idler's credibility and authority to criticize the system in which they partake in, but by directing the responsibility of the lack of a discussion regarding Islamophobic ties to the destructive health impacts upon the Muslim population, Levin and Idler create an atmosphere indicating that the audience of public health scientists and professionals have been failing to adhere to the goals they strive to achieve in their career's duration. Knowing that their mission is to prevent this pain the Muslim population faces on a daily basis, public health academics become susceptible to these emotions of responsibility and guilt, as they may feel as though their service to the system has not yet been enough, and thus they become more and more compelled to bring the issue to surface through the more focused discussions Levin and Idler propose. Now, the second technique Levin and Either make use of to persuade their audience of public health scientists and officials involves the usage of conducted studies. Right from their opening sentence, the authors credit a study that was conducted by Golin Samari, Hector E. Alcala, and Miena Zulfikar Sharif that documents the incredibly devastating impacts of Islamophobia upon various innocent Muslim populations in North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. The vast study went truly in depth to reveal that although the survey demonstrated responses from varying Muslim populations of varying ethnicities and lifestyles, basic trends across the globe revealed that, and I quote, religious discrimination targeting Muslims is significantly associated with poor physical and mental health outcomes, including greater psychological distress, more depressive symptoms, higher levels of fear, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, more self-harm, lower self-esteem, poorer self-rated health, less physical activity and more activity limitation days, unhealthier diet, higher body mass index, worse blood pressure and cholesterol readings, less access to healthcare services such as maternity care, and less healthcare seeking behavior, including screening tests. So consequently, as Levin and Either argue, Islamophobia's tenacity as seen in the study conducted by Samari et al. Creates an atmosphere calling upon the critical required attention of the public health sector. Now, the most notable reason as to why Levin and Either make use of this technique of appealing to studies is that the usage demonstrates not only how necessary the need for a focused discussion on the disastrous impacts of Islamophobia are, but further, Levin and Either's credibility and professionality to their audience. Although there's no doubt that the study compels the audience to evoke emotions of sympathy for the oppressed innocent Muslims across the globe, as an academic audience, the public health sector cannot solely rely on emotional appeals. They're required to be skeptical of all of their presented arguments. Furthermore, Levin and Either again appear to be arguing that the public health sector has failed to be pushing enough for a focused discussion on the implications of Islamophobia. And thus, in this moment, Levin and Either find themselves calling out and criticizing their own field of academics and target audience. Hence, it is essential that Levin and Either successfully prove their credibility and authority to the public health sector by providing their audience with evidence. In this case, a specific study done in support of their argument that demonstrates their conducted research in regards to their topic when formulating the actual basis of their argument. Without this credibility Levin and Either prove, the academic audience of the public health sector would likely fail to consider an argument if the authors of this argument were not able to prove their issue's presence and their involvement in the work of the public health sector, especially if these authors are pushing for the opening of a discussion among the public health field that indicates that their system lacks the inclusion of an oppressed group. So think about it, if someone were to tell you exactly how to do your job, you would probably not want to listen to them unless you knew exactly what they were talking about. So in this moment, Levin and Either actually find themselves appearing to be arguing that the public health sector has failed to be pushing for a focused discussion on the implications of Islamophobia. They're criticizing their own field of academics and their target audience. Hence, it is essential that they prove their credibility and their authority. So Levin and Either end up establishing their credibility as individuals have played a similarly pivotal role in the same system as their target audience, which further gives them the authority to criticize their system and how their mission is carried out. Thus, Levin and Either clearly and purposefully demonstrate their experience, extensive research, and professionalism through the usage of the persuasive technique of involving their conducted research in the field and topic of focus in order to ensure that their target audience of public health academics is persuaded and compelled to agree with them even when their system in place is criticized. Now, to conclude, Jeff Levin and Ellen L. Either prove that the persistence of Islamophobia across the globe requires the immediate attention of the public health sector through a more focused discussion regarding the detrimental health impacts, both physical and mental, upon the Muslim population across the globe. in an article aimed to address public health scientists and professionals in order to persuade their audience, Levin and Idler appeal to the mission of the public health sector and refer to a study conducted in support of their proposition so as to persuade their peers in the public health sector for a larger, encouraged, and focused discussion on the damage of the well-being of the Muslim population, given rise to by the violence and religious discrimination faced on a daily basis due to the increasing expansion of Islamophobia day by day. Thank you.
All right, Hiba, that was amazing, amazing. I absolutely felt how passionate you were about the subject and how impactful this was to you.
Thank you.
Want to thank you for that. All right. So next up, again, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. Idali Gomez, the President's winner from Riverside City College.
Hi. Yes, you did pronounce my name right. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? Yes? Okay. So, hello everybody. My name is Idali Gomez. Today, I am presenting Institutional Facilities, Abuse is the Antithesis of Rehabilitation. I'm a student from Riverside City College, and this research was all brought by in class with Dr. Tammy Kern in English 1BH. Oh, sorry. So before I go into the research, I kind of want to preface it with the foundation that created it all, which is this novel, The Nickel Boys, written by Colson Whitehead. And I just want to kind of briefly summarize the novel. So Whitehead opens the novel in a present setting with student archaeologists discovering a cemetery that unveils a history saturated with racial violence in the Nickel Academy. And upon this discovery, it leads former students from this academy to reunite to talk about past abuse, confinement, violence that they all experienced. And this reunites them to feel a common experience. One of these former students was Elwood Curtis, who is also the protagonist and the victim of a bigoted judicial system. And he is sent to the juvenile reformatory Nickel. And this all happens in the 1960s. So you can imagine what goes on during this time. We have the civil rights movement. We have Martin Luther King Jr. Leading this movement as well. And just a little bit about Elwood. He is optimistic, he is bright, he is very intelligent, and he is also naive. And all of these characteristics kind of reflect off of his idol, who is MLK Jr. And they are all tested at Nickel, where he learns that the so-called mobile system in place is actually corrupted, with problems leading him to not get any better, impeding his improvement to graduate and leave this school. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are 3 problems inside Whitehead's Nickel Academy, and I'm going to discuss how these issues are corrosive to the so-called rehabilitation process for an individual to reintegrate themselves back into society. These 3 problems are masked abuse, racial disparities, and racial violence. So as for masked abuse, for the students of Nickel Academy, silence is necessary to keep in secrecy the treatments meant to discipline offenders, orphans, and young adults who were not given attention from their families. For racial disparities, Whitehead highlights negligence in the Academy's resources for the African-American students when it comes to the lack of school materials, the housing conditions where they live, and the food they eat. As for racial violence, when engaging in problematic behaviors, students of color received harsher consequences than their white peers. And this was all brought by a strap called Black Beauty, which was used more often on the students of color. These 3 problems encompass 2 concepts which is institutional racism and systemic racism. Both of them sound alike, but they kind of go in different directions. Institutional racism has to do more with policies in effect that are created to reproduce racial inequalities over a given space and time. Meanwhile, systemic racism has to do more with racist practices and beliefs that transcend through all levels of a system to help conserve white power and privilege. So what is my statement overall? My thesis statement is, in his novel, Whitehead exemplifies the secrecy of abuse and cultivation of institutional racism in juvenile reformatories in the US through a fictional story based on real events. Now, the Nickel Academy is based off of a real school, which is the Dozier School for Boys that took place in Florida. So in order to get an idea of what correctional institutions really are, I kind of want to discuss how they came to be. And it was all because of the rise in crime within youth that stemmed the need for these institutions. And it dates back from the early 1800s, with the New York House of Refuge becoming the first institution to house the poor, destitute, and vagrant youth who were deemed by authorities to be on the path towards delinquency. This information is brought by the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. And this only got worse throughout time. As you can see here, unfortunately, houses of refuge were confronted with the same issues that plagued adult jails and prisons, which was overcrowding, deteriorating conditions, and staff abuse. Now, how does this look like in Whitehead's novel? Well, at Nickel, Elwood notices that some of these offenders were taken as young as 5 years old in these correctional institutions. So it prompts the question of whether this is a problem of housing, or is it actual delinquency when these minors are coming into a broken system. When it comes to the poor conditions of these buildings where they were housed at, it's emphasized in the Nickel Boys, but the deterioration is covered with performative action, which would disguise the neglect and impoverished side of the institution. So the first problem that I mentioned was the exposure of masked abuse, specifically, oppression and confinement. And this is all seen through failed policies. Public exposure of abuse has transformed the perspective on reform institutions. And the youth inside these reform institutions have to endure a corrupt system that lies behind the facade of what seems like a flawless institution. And though this may seem like an old thing that goes on inside our institutions in America, it's actually something that goes on even today. For example, in this article from the Washington Post, "It's Time to Get Rid of Reform Schools," Amber Armstrong notes that in late March of 2019, a primary American reform school, Glen Mills, had all the boys removed from its care after reporting revealed that abuse was an open secret and cover-ups abounded. Armstrong even was led to connect this school to the Dozier School for Boys in Florida because of the path of abuse and everything that happened that seemed to kind of connect all together. How does this look like in the novel? Well, Whitehead captures the epitome of child abuse through the protagonist's realization, quotes, that was their lives now, the beatings, the rapes, the unrelenting winnowing of themselves they endured. Elwood realizes that that is his life now. Inside this institution, he must endure everything that goes on. And in order to leave this institution, he must find another way to navigate himself out instead of graduating or going through everything that is acceptable in the mobile system. And all of this prompts communities to debate what to do about the maltreatment of children inside the juvenile justice system. Secondly, racial disparities of resources. This specifically targets minority racial groups inside these institutions. Whitehead integrates details of institutional racism. This is more emphasized when he notes about the lacking of resources for Black students, which brings amplification of the topic of negligence through race. Now, to kind of get this concept a little bit more, to get a little bit more familiar about this concept, so Kristen M. Lavelle and Joe R. Fagan explain the process of institutional racism in their book, Encyclopedia of Race and Racism. They explain that this process does not arise spontaneously, but it rather develops as institutions themselves are created and they're modified over the years. They are not instantaneously inputted inside of a system. It's created over time and it modifies itself. And what does this look like in education? Well, students of color disproportionately receive meager educations, hindering their ability to complete higher education. In Colson Whitehead's novel, he does this, he illustrates this with Elwood, being a Black student inside a broken rehabilitating institution. And he kind of gives an illustration of how this looks like and where they live, these students of color. He says, the colored schoolhouse was older than the dormitories. It dated back to the opening of the school, which emphasizes the lack of focus the institution had on housing students of color equally to their white peers. The last problem, which is racial violence. Now this goes with the discriminatory practices that are acted upon people of color. And we figure out that, in order to punish these students, it's not necessarily an act of wrong behavior, but it's more of a derivative of a racial hate crime. Lavelle and Fagan explain this more in their interpretation of institutional racism with the implementation of harsh practices acted on POC. They state that discriminatory practices reward those of the dominant group. This includes typically white and lighter skinned people and harm racial minority groups. And this is even said by Megan Lates, who in a visual called What Racism Looks Like, she explains that a boy of color is more likely to be subjected to harsh disciplinary policies, including excessive suspensions, expulsions, and arrest. And I want to highlight this example from Whitehead's novel, where Turner, who is a friend and mentor of Elwood, he kind of tells him what happens behind the scenes of the institution, and these students are told to keep everything a secret. They can't say anything because it will lead to further punishment on their part. He says, once in a while, they take a Black boy here and shackle up to those, arms spread out. Then they get a horsewhip and tear him. They take you out back. They don't bring you to the hospital. They put you down as escaped. These African-American boys are victims of torture and oppression, and they have to keep everything a secret, as I mentioned before. And it leads these powerful men in charge of this academy of labeling these boys' last moments on earth as something that was of their choice, which was running away, when in reality, they were killed. So what does racism look like today? It's in every aspect of society, really. This goes down to what I mentioned before, institutional and systemic racism. Racial discrimination is ingrained in our facilities and the practices that are inside these institutions. And we also see this outside when it comes to police brutality that are motivated by suspicion rather than fact. It comes when these police officers, our criminal justice system, are profiling people of color. Lavelle and Fagan mentioned especially Black men. They are racially profiled and harassed by police and are more likely to be arrested and charged with crimes. And, you know, this affects people of color, but it also kind of tells us how it betters the white community when it, since they are treated better, it kind of fuels this concept of privilege and supremacy on their part. And so we see more of a segregation, although it is not, you know, put on paper, it's not outlawed, it still continues and persists today. This is a quote from the book that I wanted to highlight, which says, you can change the law, but you can't change people and how they treat each other. It could be put on paper, it can be in the law, it can be in the system, but it's all up to everybody and each person to change who they are and treat each other with respect. That just comes down at the end of the day. So in conclusion, Whitehead's The Nickel Boys testifies to a corrupt system that is led by abuse and is magnified by racial discrimination. The exploitation of young offenders has proven to misalign with policies that aim to improve futures, and essentially these systems are poisoned with stereotypes and blinded of harm imposed on minorities. At the end of the day, it comes down to us. What can we do? What can we help with? And recognition is the first step to ending perpetual violence, specifically racial violence. Thank you. And I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Tammy Curran, who encouraged me to submit my abstract and the honors program for all the help. Specifically, Professor Amadon, thank you. And that is all.
Wow. Wow. Idali, that was an amazing presentation. As a Black male educator myself, I was with you. I was in it. It just brought up for me, just wishing that I can do more, that I could have been there to help in that way, even though it was a fictional story based on a real one. It truly goes to show, and I think you brought that up in the end of your presentation, that it's not just the laws. It truly is the heart and the minds of the people that have to change. That was extremely powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and follow that up. Next, we have Jerilyn Hurtado, the President's Award winner from Moreno Valley College.
Hi, hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you.
Okay.
You're good.
So let me share my screen. So my presentation is going to be based on child abuse and exploited children. Okay, to begin with, child abuse and neglect is any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caregiver, which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation of a child. As is out of a horror movie, our children are disappearing one by one from our communities, families, and homes. More than anything, child abuse is a terrible epidemic on the rise. Awareness is very crucial, and it is a public health issue which can lead to long-lasting effects, making thousands of children all over the U.S. as victims of child abuse. And it mostly affects any child from any age, sex, race, religion. Anyone can fall into being the victim of child abuse. Moreover, there are plenty of forms of child maltreatment. These include neglect,
Hey, Jerilyn, could make sure you stay really close to the microphone because your audio is cutting a little bit in and out for us.
Okay, sorry. To begin with, physical abuse includes injuries and health problems such as scarring, poisoning, vomiting, seizures, and breathing problems from drowning, suffocation. Now, sexual abuse includes rape, child pornography, and possession of neglect. Physical neglect characteristics are educational, food, water, clothing, supervision, and a safe and clear home. And that all falls under physical neglect. While educational neglect is the failure to enroll a school-age child in school or to provide necessary special education along with excessive absences from school. Emotional neglect is the failure to provide emotional support and care to love and affection to a child. Now, emotional abuse, aka verbal, mental, or physical abuse, is any attitude, behavior, or failure to act that interferes with the child's mental or social development. Overall, abuse crosses all racial, economic, and cultural lines. Sometimes families who seem to have it all from the outside are hiding a different story from like behind closed doors. Three three of the most known child abuse cases include 4-year-old Noah, the 10-year-old Anthony, and the 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez. Most
It's
time,
Jerilyn, it's still a little bit hard to hear you. So see if you can stay as close as you can to the mic. It sort of fades in and out. So I don't know if you're moving around, but just see. Thank you. You're doing a good job. What we can hear is really good. We just got to make sure we hear everything. Okay.
okay. Most times the system itself fails to recognize the signals of child abuse and often ignore. By this I refer to the fact that the government and social workers pay more attention to those children in foster homes rather than those false anonymous calls reporting an abuse and neglect in homes. The system is not raising enough concern towards education revealed at schools and hospitals with children with physical injuries and behavioral changes. Most of the time, police lack understanding of children's development capacities, language, and cognitive abilities to be able to communicate with the victims of these types of crimes. Unlike many other crimes that occur in public places, child abuse usually occurs in private homes. The victims may try to hide every evidence of abuse or deny that it took place, which we see in plenty of cases, but in plenty of the cases that the system fails to capture. Every year, more than 3.6 million referrals are made to child protection agencies involving more than 6.6 million children. Now, 1 million children are raised in the United States. Most counted are children who have reported. Other children are either too young, have special needs, and attend for themselves, or they are threatened. There are many types of child abuse, as I mentioned before. Most victims are abused by a parent. In child abuse cases, 78% of children were victimized by a parent, according to child abuse statistics. Moving on, child abuse in homes is one of the aspects of the largest problems related to child maltreatment that occurs in a variety of places and by people with variety of relationships. The injuries sustained often resemble those caused by unintentional or accidental situations. The police must usually evaluate reasonable explanations. The, the, support, the supports are high if police misdiagnose the cause of injuries. The potential for future victims is. Moreover, the victim is always a young child. Police need to understand the children's development capacity, their language, and when they're speaking about what's going on in their homes. A devastating case that proves the system has maltreatment is the case of Gabriel Fernandez. The trial of Gabriel is a 2022 crime documentary television series about the 2013 murder and abuse of Gabriel Fernandez, an 8-year-old boy from Pelham, California. Gabriel was a victim of neglect, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse by his parents. Gabriel showed every critical signal to prove that he was being physically abused by his parents. Gabriel would report to school with bruises, burns, and scratches all over his body, yet teachers would not listen to the indications shown in physical harm. Gabriel appeared to have plenty of maltreatment that many ignored. He was like any other ordinary 8-year-old boy, and smart, kind, well-disciplined kid, and showed no violent behavior among others. Gabriel slept in a box inside a cabinet. He was also being shot in the face with BB guns, forced to eat cat litter, locked in a cupboard for hours, and often was pepper sprayed by his father. When CPS showed up to Gabriel's house, his parents hid any evidence that they had against Gabriel and his abuse. But what's even worse was that the Department of Child and Family Services and law enforcement was called to the scene multiple times before Gabriel's death, and no action was yet taken. At one point, social workers even ordered Gabriel to stop lying about his abuse, allowing his abusers to continue the torture until the horrific end. As seen in the documentary, sheriffs were called to the house by family members days before the murder, but action was not taken. Gabriel was constantly let down by the system when he was most needed. When CPS showed up in Gabriel's house, as I mentioned before, his parents hid every single kind of evidence they had. Officials possibly believed the parent over the children, regardless of their abuse, and indicators such as crimes. In fact, law enforcement often took his mom's word that everything was fine and never even asked to speak with Gabriel. And when he did, according to the family members, they feared him fatal and told him that if he kept lying about his bruises, then he'd be the one going to jail, not his parents. Officials went on and believed his mother, his parents. They believed the parents more than the children, and it's honestly seen in many homes nowadays where their parents weren't involved taking besides the child. In my opinion, it's disappointing and disturbing. If there is a report or a visual notice that a child is being abused, the issue should not be ignored or left. Even if it seems to be in a quote unquote safe environment, the big issue that we see is that although people may suspect or be aware of abuse, many people refuse and are usually unsure about reporting their suspicions, which is understandable. Reasons vary. They may not want to get involved or believe that parents have the right to treat and discipline their children in any way they desire. Simply may not want to accept the implications of their suspicions of the people that they love. Mentioning that some professionals worry about compromising their report with the clients if the report suspect is abuse. As in this case, Gabriel's circumstance of horrific torture were ignored and ultimately ended when his mother and her boyfriend moved him to death. It is unknown what is going on behind doors. Child abuse is not just about broken bones, bruises, cuts, or any physical appearance that is made. Being emotionally abused and neglected is just as dangerous and harmful. Overall, to conclude, child abuse is serious and should always be taken into consideration. Abuse is a terrible epidemic that needs systems will raise concern and attend to those revealing signs of abuse in schools, hospitals, births, children with physical injuries, and behavior changes. Children should not have to experience torture and dramatic incidents. However, they are immediate action should be taken and not ignored. And that will conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much, Jerilyn. I don't know how you were able to do that presentation and do the research and not be emotionally invested. I remember when that story came out on Netflix, I couldn't even watch the whole story. That it hurt my heart to see that. And then also,
Yes.
I mean, just because it's in the media, I took over the summer, I got a chance to watch the new Joker movie. And again, that's an excellent, again, it feeds into that, the impacts of child abuse. It absolutely has an impact on all of us. And like I said previous, in a society that truly loves children, it's so crazy that it's so prevalent as it is today. So thank you for your thank you for your work. That was impactful.
Yes, thank you. And I would also like to thank my professor, Miss Nancy, for helping me and through this project. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad I was able to be a part of it. You did excellent, Jerilyn. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Now, the three presentations that we have heard so far, very impactful, but they've been deep. That got me a little emotional. I'm in my feelings a little bit. I'm so glad our last presenter is coming with a topic that's going to be a little bit more upbeat, understanding the feelings that we all have right now and the stress that we all going through. I definitely want to end this on an upbeat note. All right, so I'm going to introduce our last presenter, Jacob Gower, who was the Chancellor's Award winner, also from Riverside City College. Floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jacob Gower. This is a research paper. Let me figure out how to share screen. Sorry. Whew, adrenaline's a heck of a thing. All right, is that looking all right to everybody?
Looking
Looks
good.
good, Jacob. You're doing great.
All right, so my presentation is on the spread of nerd culture, how it is becoming more popular, and how the participation in that from current participants and possible future participants might impact people positively or negatively. I remember being on a construction site with a work crew that I was on, and I had gotten together a group of coworkers to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I remember walking up to someone who I thought might finish out the group, and I asked him, "Hey, would you be interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons?" And I remember his response was quick. He looked at me and he said, "No, thanks, man. I already lost my virginity." And it hit me, and I was like, "Oh, that is a stereotype, isn't it?" And it made me really think about how people view people involved in nerd culture and things that are considered nerdy, and what the stereotypes are. Eventually, I did talk him into playing, but it was a pretty jarring moment for me because I thought, it was just making jokes, construction site talk. Anyway, my presentation is The Borg Were Right, why the assimilation of nerd culture is a good thing. So who are nerds? What is nerd culture? So for the sake of this, I'm going to be using nerd, even though you might see the word geek on some of this. They're basically interchangeable at this point. Well, some people have much stronger feelings about this than others. Most people don't really care to make the distinction, and language being a living thing, it has kind of evolved to mean the same thing. So the actual definition of nerd culture is fairly nebulous. There is not exactly a defined boundary on a lot of it, but the consistent theme through most of it is an interest in niche media or technology. So where did the term nerd come from? Geek is older. It was used with circus performers and freaks. Freaks, pardon my language. That was the actual definition I saw. Nerd was originally used actually in Dr. Seuss in 1950. That's the first time it was ever published. It was in a bunch of nonsense words. I think it was If I Owned a Zoo, with a nurgle, a nerd, and a seersucker too. Didn't mean anything. Then the next year, there was an article published in Newsweek in October of 1951 where it said they'd collected groupings of current slang. Someone who once would be called a drip or a square is now, regrettably, a nerd. The insult evolved over time to become the stereotype that we understand it as, an unathletic, bookish, technologically savvy social pariah. And generally, the stereotype is hyper white. So there is a racial aspect in there. Think Urkel in the 80s or Revenge of the Nerds or something like that. Or even in some cases, The Big Bang Theory. There is this hyper anglicized way of speaking and very well enunciated aspect to the stereotype. And as those people were cast out from, popular society, they found shared interests in their outcast status and formed what is now today nerd culture. At the time of, this all starting 50s, 60s, 70s, there wasn't a way for them to communicate like we have today, the internet being a massive transformative player in all of this. And traditionally, the way they would trade hobbies, trade niche knowledge would be conventions. The biggest one being Comic-Con, which actually started in a hotel basement. It was the first one that was ever held, and it had multiple hobbies involved because no single hobby in this era was large enough to have its own convention. The first Comic-Con also hosted many sci-fi authors, I think Ray Bradbury being one of them, along with Jack Kirby, the artist, and many other large figures in nerd culture. A large portion of the expansion of nerd culture can be attributed to the blockbuster superhero movies that started in the 2000s with Spider-Man and Batman and the X-Men films, as well as the expansion of the San Diego Convention Center, which allowed the events to triple in size and host that capacity. Another thing that has been speculated by developmental psychologists is the destigmatization of, or destigmatizing, sorry, I don't think destigmatization isn't a word. The destigmatizing of nerd culture may be attributed to the dot-com boom and figures like Bill Gates reaching prominence and becoming, one of the richest men on the planet. That being the kind of figure people would want to emulate. And again, like I said in the beginning, the internet, social media being a huge driving factor in the spread of a lot of these niche cultures and ideas, because people could share ideas in ways that they could not before. Anyway, there has been a downside to the spread of this. People have not entirely reacted positively. There are also negative aspects to nerd culture. So from within nerd culture, there are, so from the outside, there are these stereotypes. From within, there are the gatekeepers, I'll call them in this case, and the absolutely evangelical, as a reporter from Forbes put it, fans. So when Suicide Squad released in this instance, some fans demanded that critics give it a better rating than they had after it had been panned, because if it got bad ratings, they might not make more movies for it, and their intellectual property would die off. It's a little bit of a strange reaction, given that they also didn't want other people involved in it, but yeah. Some are tribalistic to a fault, creating arbitrary tests of what a true nerd is, true nerd, or and who the fake geeks are. These tests are primarily targeted at women. There was a study done by Sonnet Robinson for her doctoral research. She did a survey and found that 30% of the participants in her survey had avoided forums 10 or more times because they could not hide their gender in that forum, and 26% had avoided interactions 10 or more times online because of their gender. Some participants reported being majorly harassed, vile things said to them because they had told someone that they were female. And there are undeniably toxic and extremely insular aspects and communities to nerd culture. Prime examples being 4chan, incel communities on that, the infamous ones you hear about in the news. But as with everything, there are two sides. Hobbies within nerd cultures, although there are niches and communities that are extremely toxic, there are hobbies and activities that offer extremely valuable tools in improving social skills. Games like World of Warcraft and other MMOs offer ways for people to interact in mass and exchange a kind of social currency in a virtual setting without real world consequences most of the time. And games like Counter-Strike, Fortnite, you said that one earlier, and Call of Duty offer opportunities to work as a team, communicate in split-second decisions, and plan maneuvers, cooperate, and exchange social currency in that setting. And there are positive and negative ramifications to actions in that. And in World of Warcraft, you can be kicked out of a guild, you can be booted off of a team, you can be banned, and it can be an important tool for learning those things. Dungeons and Dragons has been proven to help children with autism and young adults improve their social skills and develop socially. So in some cases, when therapists have worked with children with autism by playing Dungeons and Dragons, when the children played with the therapist, the cooperation required to overcome the obstacles put in place by the therapist who was running the game resulted in the children spending longer amounts of time engaged in conversation, planning maneuvers, and cooperating with one another to overcome whatever challenge was in front of them. And a certain part of that is being able to interact with people you know while pretending to be someone else. Besides all of this, the growing participation in nerd culture, a culture is defined by who is a part of it. And if there is a flood of different-minded people into that culture, it dilutes the toxicity. I'm not entirely sure how else to put that. To illustrate examples of both sides of this, I'm going to use the case of The Last of Us 2, a game that, or part 2, a game that released earlier this year. Two very polarized responses. So it was released in June of this year to immediate and severe backlash because they were pushing propaganda. They were pushing an SJW agenda. They were pushing an LGBTQ character on them. And there were rumors released in April of one of the characters being transgendered, which wound up being refuted later by the developers. But the developers began receiving a torrent of complaints that eventually evolved into death threats and anti-Semitic attacks and awful, awful things you should never say to another human being. The game, which is 25 to 30 hours of content, was within 12 hours of the game being released, receiving 0 out of 10 reviews. Another article on Forbes commented on this, saying that some of these people must be playing this game insanely quickly, or they're just reacting to something they don't like in the story. So on the other side of this, on the positive side, The Last of Us Part 2, before Ghosts of Tsushima was released, was the fastest selling PS4 exclusive ever worldwide, and at one point was the 3rd best selling game of the year behind Animal Crossing and Call of Duty. I think currently it's 5th. I didn't really update the numbers on this. When I wrote this, it was it was 3rd. The Last of Us Part 2 was also well received by professional critics. Metacritic, it had a score of 93, and while the user reviews were extremely polar, with few reviewers leaving anything from 3 to 7, everything was either below 3 or above 7. The majority of user reviews was above 7, so out of 400,000, the overall score was 5.7, meaning the average was higher. Add to that major titles that offer representation to LGBTQ women, people of color, and minorities in leading roles have become increasingly common. I mean, Wonder Woman was called DC's best movie to date by some critics. Captain Marvel was extremely influential, and I enjoyed it personally. Black Panther was excellently received. It was very well done. And The Last of Us Part 2, as I've been discussing. While there has been controversy around some of these and people creating issues, the overwhelming response has been positive. And that's because enough of us see the common humanity in all of this. Though there is truth to the assertion that communities and niches within nerd culture are extremely toxic and volatile, like a chemical spill. The flood of new interest, the flood of new people participating has been enough to dilute that and wash it, and hopefully eventually completely wash it away. The shifting demographics is increasingly in favor of inclusivity and shifting away from arbitrary gatekeeping and outright hostility. Given the tools that hobbies and media and nerd culture provide, the positives severely outweigh the negatives. And particularly, if we can find the common humanity in there and find a common interest, then hopefully we can help that culture change for the better. And luckily, most people have a common interest in improving themselves. And luckily, nerd culture offers many tools to do that. Thank you.
All right, Jacob. Now, I feel like I've always considered myself a self-proclaimed nerd, but you enlightened me on some stuff. So I feel like that was a great way to bring up the energy throughout the presentation. Like I said, the first three were extremely impactful and heavy. This was something that we can absolutely see that you were invested in, is something that was important to you. So I definitely want to thank you for the hard work and research that you put into that particular research project.
Thank you.
So now this is the Q&A part of the presentation. I want to open up the floor. I know it's quite a few of us, so if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we can go ahead and get to you. Any questions for any of the four presenters regarding their research that was presented today? Feel like I'm in class again. I say something and there's like that 10-second lag. Like, it's not a rhetorical question. I know we had some amazing presentations. I know somebody has to have a few questions.
I have a question, and this can go for any of the presenters. So much of the four different presentations all sort of were focused on how to change cultures or aspects of culture for the better, how to persuade others. And I guess the question is, I was really focused on the methods. I sort of like had this little germ that stuck in my brain from Hiba's presentation. The methods of what is it, from your research, what do you believe it's going to take on your topic or any topic to influence society for positive change? What tactics will be effective at persuading others?
Hi, Professor Hogan. That was a really great question. But yeah, that was a big part of my research, and was figuring out how, well, I said it in my presentation, was how do academics persuade academia? Like, what makes their argument effective enough for academia to want to open up a discussion on topics such as Islamophobia and something, because when Levin and Eidler in my research, when they were criticizing the public health sector, they were criticizing their own system and their own system that they took partake in. And I think it was just something that they really felt like they were a part of, and that they have the willpower to actually make a change in it. So like, their research was really amazing to me, because what they did was really establish their credibility, their authority, their professionality. And basically they would have to prove to their target audience of the public health sector that they do have what it takes to make this kind of change, and why this kind of change is necessary. So I think that's what made it really interesting to me, was to see how they established that credibility and authority to criticize that system.
Impactful. Okay. Any other questions?
Jacob has his hand.
Awesome. Go ahead, Jacob.
Jake, sorry.
Excuse me.
Oh, Jacob, if you had a question, you can go first.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was very confused for a second. I didn't, but I was like, I'm gonna stop talking. I'm sorry.
The floor is yours, Jake.
Okay. Yeah, so to start, I apologize because I can't remember the names of all the presenters, but I had a question for the presenter who had the presentation on the Nickel Boys, and that presentation, especially with what's been going on this year, there's been a lot of talk about systemic racism, and how there are laws in our society that are prejudiced against minorities and people of color. And my question was, due to the fact that I don't have much experience with our law system, I consider myself very uneducated in that area. I was wondering which laws that you found, particularly that did affect people of color and minorities, and what those were.
Hi. Yeah, so first of all, in my research, I didn't really go into like the laws, but coming from the other classes I have taken, there's many, I think today we see this more about the laws taking place because of the media. We see this on our cell phones. We see the police brutality. We see excessive force on people of color, especially Black men. And to be frank, this is not new. This has been going on, like, I mean, that's kind of like what America has based itself on, this topic of racism. And just to give you an example, back in the 80s, when the war on drugs came, how policing and the criminal justice system really focused more on low-income neighborhoods, especially communities of color. We see this, I'm sorry, I'm just like really nervous right now, but we see this more take place on communities that are low income. They do not have the privacy or the means to actually like know about the system in place. So I'm sorry. So yeah, we just see this all around, and it's not something that's new. I don't know. I hope I answered your question.
No, yeah. So it's more of a mindset than any like specific law that's targeting them, or even it might be a lack of laws.
Yeah, just as I mentioned, it has like more to do with the people. Like anything can be set in place in the law, but it ultimately comes down to the people and how they're raised really into you know, having these perceptions of society and of other people, minority groups. And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for answering that. I know several police officers who have been minority. I actually bought my house from an African-American police officer. And he in particular had not experienced it himself. So I know that especially on my side, I really want to gain more knowledge from all sides. And, you know, I definitely appreciated being able to ask you that and get your take on it, because like I said, it's something I really am not knowledgeable in. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, that answered my question.
All right. Thank you for your question, Jake. Anyone else? The floor is open.
Yeah, I'll throw something out. You know, one of the things that struck me, you know, this is part of what Jake was just talking about Idali's presentation, is like you even see it in the book, The Nickel Boys, and the way she talks about it, that laws don't create our values, the laws reflect our values. So if we have distorted values, like that's really the point where we need to address stuff. The laws are a problem, but fundamentally the laws are just simply a manifestation of what we believe. And so I think that's where you see that. And that's the connection I thought was particularly thoughtful in Idali's presentation about the Nickel Boys. They're working on some underlying assumptions and values or attitudes towards the Black kids in the academy, and the laws and the sort of the policies, I guess not laws, but policies for that institution are then instituted as a means to control and police them. And you see that as just a small metaphor for something much larger and more widespread, unfortunately.
I'll go. I think something that stuck out to me, and this was brought up in Heba's presentation, but I kind of feel like it's applicable to each of the four. And that's the stark differences that we see between theory and practice. So when Heba was talking about how the two researchers had to be critical on their own practice, and I'm thinking to myself, just based on my small knowledge of the medical field, that in theory, you know, when you take the Hippocratic Oath, it's to help all and all people, and there's no race, there's no ethnicities, there's no gender or sex connected to that. It's all. So in theory, we have an unbiased view of the job and helping all. Actual practice is a little different, because when we're actually doing the work and physically doing it, then our personal biases come into play. And I think that was, it made me think of when she was talking about the differences and them, the two researchers wanting to be critical on their own field. And it was like, well, in theory, it's unbiased. It's to help to all. But then when we actually do it, we're bringing in our own experiences, our own biases to the job that we do. And a lot of times, and it goes to show that those biases help distort how would I say this? Help distort the amount of care that we give in that specific area, or the amount of interest that we pay to these particular individuals. And I think that was something that was kind of brought out in each of the presentations. I can definitely see how that would be reflective in Idali's presentation. The concept of, again, in education, now understanding that, you know, we're coming out of, what was it, Brown v. Education, that was 1954, I do believe. So education was segregated, separate but equal, and there were instances where it wasn't all the same. But I feel like the idea of education as a whole is to educate all. No race, creed, sex, gender is irrelevant to all. How that plays out in practice, we see is completely different, because again, our own personal biases and our own experiences play into that. Again, I think that was something that was brought up in Jerilyn's presentation and Jacob's as well. So that was one thing I felt that jumped out at me as you all presented, how different it is to research something in theory and then to actually see it played out in actual practice, and how those are different.
I have a question for Jacob Gower. By the way, I found your presentation and your eloquence on the matter to be really engaging. So my question is, I'm not quite familiar with the hand sign that you gave out at the end. Could you clarify what that is?
That's from Star Trek. It's the Vulcan sign, meaning live long and prosper.
Okay, thank you.
It's a sign of peace.
Once you become indoctrinated into the nerd culture, you actually learn the sign. So it's different. Everybody got their own language. How cool is that? Awesome. Again, anyone else? We have 4 amazing presentations that we just saw. Does anyone else have any questions that they're curious about for these presenters? So I'll give the obligatory pause, just like I do in my class, and not to belabor the point. So if there aren't any more questions put out, I'll turn this back over to Professor Hogan.
Okay. This has been some good discussion, not just of the research itself, but of really the purpose behind why we do the research. You know, all of us we are writing projects because, you know, we want to develop ourselves intellectually, and we want to get grades, and we want to transfer, and we want to get on with our lives. But really the reason that we do research is to better our communities, to make the world a better place, leave the world better than when we came into it. And so I think that this whole panel has really furthered that goal. And I'm proud of everybody who presented today. To leave you all, I will leave you with this. Because while these 4 presentations were just one slice of the research for this year's conference, there is other research from this conference that will be shared, sort of kind of the extended 2020 roll with the punches rollout for the rest of the semester. And there are some folks who I've recorded their presentations, and Professor Amadon has recorded them, and we're going to be in the process of uploading them and editing them. So there's more where this came from, and we'll also make this recording available for people who want to take a look at it in the future or who couldn't catch the whole thing. Furthermore, for those of you who are in the honors program, there is quickly what is going to be coming is applications to submit your research to our regional conference. So here at RCC, this is our local research conference, but every year we also have a regional research conference. And during non-pandemic times, that is usually held at UCI. But this year it's going to be it's going to be in some sort of virtual format as well. But sort of after the break, we will be collecting abstracts from folks who are interested in submitting their research further for that sort of bigger venue. But other than that, thank you everybody for coming. And for those of you who supported the students, thank you for supporting the students. And it was great to see all of you. Have a wonderful holidays coming up, and stay safe out there.
Well done, everybody. Well done.
Excellent. Positive energy towards you all.
Yes. Have a great weekend, a good break.